It started as an ordinary Tuesday morning in New York City. Traffic moved slowly through the streets, people hurried to work, and street vendors set up their carts for another busy day. Nobody noticed when the sky began to darken at first. New Yorkers were used to sudden summer storms. But this was different. The darkness spread in a perfect circle, like a giant umbrella opening above the city. Then the air went completely still. Birds stopped singing. Cars stopped honking. Everyone looked up at once. Through the clouds came something impossible. A ship so large it blocked out the sun. It was silver and gold, shaped like a massive arrowhead, stretching from Central Park to the Hudson River. Its surface gleamed with strange patterns that seemed to move and shift in ways that hurt the eyes to look at for too long. Within minutes, every phone, radio, television, and computer screen in the world began displaying the same message. Attention, citizens of Earth. The Galactic Council demands your immediate attention. In the United Nations building, security guards rushed to evacuate the delegates, but General Secretary Robert Wilson refused to leave. If they wanted to destroy us, he said calmly, they wouldn't have bothered saying hello. He straightened his tie and waited. The message repeated 3 times before the screens changed. A figure appeared, almost human-looking, but not quite. It had pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer like silk, 4 arms, and eyes that glowed like distant stars. When it spoke, its words were perfectly translated into every language on Earth simultaneously. We are the voice of the Galactic Council, representing 300 civilizations across 12,000 light-years. We have watched your species develop since you first learned to make fire. Now you have reached a crucial stage. You have split the atom. You have touched your own moon. You have begun to understand the basic principles of faster-than-light travel. It is time for you to join galactic civilization. The alien paused, letting its words sink in. In homes and offices around the world, billions of humans held their breath, wondering if this was first contact, if humanity was about to join a larger community of worlds. The voice continued. As is tradition for all emerging species, you will pay tribute to the Council. 30% of all Earth's resources, minerals, water, biological materials, and processed goods, will be collected annually. You will accept the Council's authority in all matters of interstellar law and commerce. You will provide military support when required. In exchange, you will receive protection and limited access to Council technology. General Secretary Wilson's hands gripped his chair's armrests until his knuckles turned white. Around him, the remaining UN staff stood in shocked silence. You have 7 standard Earth days to accept these terms, the voice announced. If you refuse, the image changed, showing a small Earth-like planet. A beam of light struck it from above, and the planet's surface began to crack like an egg, revealing molten core beneath. This was the fate of the last species that rejected Council authority. They chose extinction over civilization. We trust humans will make a wiser choice. The image returned to the alien voice. 7 days. We await your response. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, someone in the UN building began to laugh. It was Alice Cooper, the British ambassador, a woman known for her dry humor. Well, she said, wiping tears from her eyes, at least they're honest about being space pirates. I was worried we'd have to sit through some nonsense about them being here to help us evolve spiritually. General Secretary Wilson finally released his grip on his chair. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Get me every world leader. Now. And someone find out if that ship is broadcasting any other signals we can intercept. He paused, then added, and get me every history book we have on how empires fall. Something about this feels familiar. Above New York, the massive ship hung motionless, its shadow covering millions of people who were already beginning to ask themselves, what happens when humanity says no to gods? The countdown had begun. The Swiss Air Force patrolled the skies over Geneva as government planes landed one after another. Within 12 hours of the alien message, nearly every world leader had arrived for what reporters were calling humanity's most important meeting. Inside the heavily guarded conference center, General Secretary Wilson stood at the podium, looking at faces he never expected to see in the same room. Countries that hadn't spoken to each other in decades now sat side by side. Old enemies shared coffee in the hallways. Fear, it seemed, was a powerful unifier. "The military situation is clear," said General Thomas Parker, speaking from a screen behind Wilson. "Their ship alone is bigger than Manhattan. Our best weapons would be like throwing rocks at a battleship." He paused, letting that sink in. "If they have more ships like that one, we wouldn't last a day." The room erupted in angry shouts. The Chinese president wanted to negotiate better terms. The Brazilian leader suggested trying to buy more time. Others argued for immediate surrender to protect their people. Then the Russian president, an old man named Victor who had once been a history teacher, slowly stood up. The room went quiet. Victor was known for speaking only when he had something important to say. "In 1812, he began, his voice soft but clear, "Napoleon came to Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. Everyone said we should surrender." He smiled slightly. "We burned Moscow instead. Napoleon learned that some people would rather destroy everything than live as slaves." He looked around the room. In 1941, Hitler came with an even bigger army. Again, people said surrender was smart. Again, we chose to fight. His eyes hardened. "Those who study history know something important. Every empire that thought itself unbeatable has fallen. Every single one." The Indian Prime Minister nodded slowly. "The British once ruled a quarter of the world. They had guns against our sticks. We defeated them with salt and cotton spinning wheels. And now," said a young African leader, "these aliens think they can come here and demand tribute like old colonial masters." She stood up. "They understand nothing about humans." Wilson watched as the mood in the room changed. Fear turned to anger, then to determination. A plan began to form. They would need to work fast, and in total secrecy. Every intelligence agency, every military force, every scientific mind would have to work together for the first time in human history. The Japanese Prime Minister raised an interesting point. "Has anyone noticed that they're not actually blocking our satellites, or our internet, or trying to stop this meeting? For such an advanced civilization, they're being surprisingly careless." Dr. Emma Reed, Earth's leading expert in game theory, had been quietly listening in the corner. Now she spoke up. "Or maybe they're overconfident. Maybe no one has ever really challenged them before. Think about their message. They showed us what happened to the last species that said no. But what if that was thousands of years ago? What if everyone since then has been too scared to resist?" Wilson looked at the clock. 6 days remained. He pressed a button, and a map of Earth appeared on the main screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think it's time we taught the galaxy's oldest bullies a new lesson. Dr. Reed, work with our military leaders. Find their weak points. General Parker, I want our forces positioned to look defensive, but hide our real capabilities." He turned to the room full of world leaders. "And everyone else, go back to your countries. Act scared. Act divided. Let them think we're arguing among ourselves. But get your people ready quietly. Because in 6 days, humanity is going to do what it does best: surprise everyone." As the leaders filed out, Victor stayed behind. He walked up to Wilson and said quietly, "Napoleon's army was also too big to feed itself. The bigger they are." Wilson nodded. "The harder they'd fall." Dr. James Miller hadn't slept in 2 days. Empty coffee cups littered his desk at NASA's Signal Analysis Center, where he and his team had been studying every bit of data from the alien ship. Something about their transmissions bothered him, but he couldn't figure out what. "Play it again," he told his computer. The alien's message filled the screen for the 100th time. He watched the part showing the destruction of the rebellious planet, frame by frame. Then he saw it. "Get me General Secretary Wilson," he said, his hands shaking as he typed notes. Now, within an hour, Wilson's face appeared on the secure video link. "This better be good, Doctor. We're running out of time." "It's better than good," Miller said, unable to hide his excitement. "That video they showed us, of the planet being destroyed, I found something wrong with it." He shared his screen. "Look at the star pattern behind the planet. Those stars don't match any known configuration in our galaxy." Then I analyzed the light scatter patterns. "English, Doctor. Simple English. Sorry. Simply put, the video is computer-generated. They faked it." Miller let that sink in. "And that's not all. We've been analyzing their ship's energy emissions. It's mostly, well, empty. Like a balloon. 90% of that massive ship is just for show." Wilson leaned forward. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Their actual ship is probably just a small part in the middle. Everything else is like a movie set, impressive to look at, but not real." Miller pulled up more data. "And there's more. Their translation system. It's good, but it makes mistakes. Little ones. It sometimes uses phrases from old Earth movies and books. They've been studying us by watching our entertainment." In another part of the world, Admiral Thompson was making similar discoveries. Her submarine crews had detected something interesting. The alien ship was blind underwater. It had no way to track their nuclear subs and its defensive shields. They flickered every few hours, like they were running low on power. "It's all a bluff," she told her officers. "A big, fancy bluff." Meanwhile, in London, Dr. Reed's team had been studying historical records of other empires. They found a pattern. The biggest empires often fell not because of strong enemies, but because they got lazy. They relied on their reputation rather than actual strength. "Look at this," she told her team, pointing to her findings. "The Council's message uses the same threats, word for word, that the British Empire once used on smaller nations. They're working from an old playbook. They're not adapting. They're not innovating. They're just doing what worked before." The pieces were coming together. All around the world, different teams were finding the same thing. Weakness hidden behind a fancy show. Wilson called an emergency video meeting with key leaders. "So what you're all telling me," he said, looking at his screen full of tired but excited faces, "is that the Council is basically a schoolyard bully who's never been punched back." "Exactly," said Miller. "They have advanced technology, yes, but they're not gods. They're not all-powerful. They're just bullies. Old, comfortable bullies who haven't had to fight for real in a very long time." Admiral Thompson spoke up. "And like all bullies, they don't expect resistance. They expect us to be scared of their size, their fancy ship, their big threats. But if we stand up to them, they might run," finished Dr. Reed. "No empire in history has survived a reputation for weakness. If we show the galaxy they can be defied." Wilson smiled for the first time in days. "Then we might not just save Earth. We might free the galaxy." He looked at the clock. 4 days remained. "Admiral Thompson, Dr. Reed, Dr. Miller, I need a plan. Something they won't expect. Something that will show everyone in the galaxy that humans don't bow to threats." As the meeting ended, Miller looked again at the fake video of planetary destruction. "You know," he said quietly, "for advanced aliens, they're not very good liars." The time had come to call their bluff. Admiral Maria Thompson stood in front of a room full of military leaders from around the world. Behind her, a giant screen showed the alien ship hovering over New York. 3 days remained until humanity had to give their answer. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, pointing to her presentation, "welcome to Operation Poker Face." The room went quiet. These were the best military minds on Earth: American generals, Chinese admirals, Russian commanders, and leaders from every major military power, all waiting to hear humanity's plan for survival. "The Council expects us to do one of two things," Thompson continued. Either submit like cowards or fight like fools. We're going to do neither. She pressed a button, and the screen showed a new image. We're going to play the biggest bluff in human history. The plan was both simple and crazy. Every nuclear submarine in the world would surface at the same time, forming a circle around the alien ship. Fighter jets from every nation would fill the skies. Ground-based missiles would target the ship from every continent. But here's the key, Thompson said, zooming in on specific points. None of our weapons will be armed. Not one. We're not actually going to fight them. We're going to make them think we're ready to die taking them with us. A Chinese general raised his hand. And if they call our bluff? Thompson smiled. That's where Dr. Miller's team comes in. The tired scientist stepped forward. His team had been working nonstop, studying the alien ship's weak points. Their shield system has to lower every 4 hours to reset. It's only down for 2 seconds, but that's their weak point. They think we haven't noticed, but we have. During those 2 seconds, Thompson continued, every submarine, every missile site, every fighter will light them up with targeting systems. They'll think we've figured out their weakness. They'll think we're ready to strike the moment their shields drop. But we won't actually fire, asked a Russian commander. No, Thompson confirmed, because we don't have to. They've never faced real resistance before. They don't know how to handle it. Their whole empire is built on looking scary, not being scary. Dr. Reed, who had been quietly watching, spoke up. Think of it like a peacock spreading its feathers. It looks impressive, but it's all show. The moment someone actually challenges them, they'll run, finished Thompson. But there's more. Dr. Miller, show them what else we found. Miller stepped forward again. We've detected communications between their ship and others in their empire. They're nervous. Other species are watching what happens here. If Earth stands up to them, their whole empire might crumble, Thompson said. 300 worlds, all watching to see if the mighty council can handle one small planet saying no. The room burst into discussion. It was risky. If they were wrong, if the council really was willing to fight, Earth would be defenseless. Every weapon would be empty, every threat a bluff. I have a question, said a young Indian commander. What if they scan our weapons and realize they're not armed? Thompson's smile grew wider. Already thought of that. We're going to flood their sensors with so much noise they won't be able to get clear readings. Dr. Miller's team found a way to use their own translation system against them, creating interference. She looked around the room. This plan only works if every nation agrees, if we all act together. One submarine out of place, one fighter wing not in position, and the whole thing falls apart. One by one, the military leaders nodded. Old enemies reached across the table to shake hands. Traditional rivals exchanged respectful salutes. 3 days, Thompson said, looking at the clock. We have 3 days to position everything without them noticing. 3 days to prepare the biggest bluff in human history. As the meeting ended, the Russian commander walked up to Thompson. You know, he said quietly, in poker, sometimes the winning hand is the one you don't play. Thompson nodded. Let's hope the council folds. The final morning arrived. The alien ship still hung over New York, its massive shadow now familiar to the millions below. In every major city around the world, people gathered in front of giant screens, waiting for humanity's answer to the Galactic Council. Inside the United Nations building, General Secretary Wilson straightened his tie one last time. Admiral Thompson stood beside him, checking her tablet. Everything was in place. Every submarine was in position. Every fighter squadron waited at the ready. Every missile site was prepared, all hidden under a blanket of electronic noise that kept the council's sensors confused. Are you sure about this? Wilson asked quietly. Thompson nodded. The last submarine just reported in. We're ready. She paused. Of course, if we're wrong about them. Then this will be the shortest speech in human history, Wilson finished. Dr. Miller rushed in, holding his latest sensor readings. Their shield just reset. We have 3 hours and 58 minutes until the next window. He looked at his notes, and we're picking up a lot of communication between their ship and their homeworlds. The whole galaxy is watching. Good, said Wilson. That's exactly what we want. He walked to the broadcast station they had set up. Every television, radio, and communication device on Earth was linked to this one room. One message, translated into every human language, would reach every person on the planet at the same time. And more importantly, it would reach the Council. Wilson took a deep breath. Thompson gave him a thumbs up. Miller nodded from his station. Send it, Wilson said. Across the planet, screens flickered. In Times Square, in Piccadilly Circus, in Red Square, in Tiananmen Square, everywhere, the same message appeared. Simple, direct, one word, no. In the Council ship, the alien voice was caught mid-sentence, discussing strategy with other Council members. The simple response caught them completely off guard. They had expected begging, negotiation, maybe even threats. But this. The voice quickly composed itself and sent back a message. Perhaps you do not understand the consequences of refusal. Your species will be. They were cut off by the same response, again in every human language. No. The Council ship's sensors suddenly lit up with warnings. Hidden by their electronic noise, Earth's submarines had surfaced in a perfect circle around New York Harbor. Fighter jets appeared from behind clouds, surrounding the ship at every altitude. Missile sites from every continent locked onto their position. The voice sent another message, this time with a slight tremor. This is your final warning. Submit or no. Inside the UN building, Miller watched his instruments carefully. Their shield just flickered. They're pulling more power to their weapons. He paused. But they're not firing. They're hesitating. Thompson smiled. Of course they are. Look at their sensors. They can't tell if our weapons are armed or not. All they know is that they're surrounded. We're not afraid. And we somehow knew exactly when their shield would be weakest. The Council sent a longer message, offering better terms. Only 20% tribute, more technology access, a seat on their lower council. Earth's response remained the same. No. Hour after hour passed. The Council's ship remained in position, its weapons charged but never firing. Each time they sent a message, Earth responded with the same word. No negotiations, no discussion, just refusal. Finally, Miller's eyes widened at his readings. They're powering down their weapons. Thompson leaned forward. What else? Their communication channels are going crazy, messages flying everywhere across their empire. And, wait, he adjusted his instruments. We're picking up similar responses from other worlds. The same word, in different alien languages. Wilson smiled. What are they saying? Miller looked up, his face breaking into a grin. They're saying no. The revolution had begun. 12 hours had passed since Earth's first no. The alien ship still hung over New York, but something had changed. Its gleaming surface seemed less bright, its imposing size less threatening. Like a bully who had finally been stood up to, it had lost its air of invincibility. Inside the UN command center, staff had settled into shifts. Dr. Miller hadn't left his monitoring station, surviving on coffee and determination. They've tried to scan our weapons 37 times now, he reported. Still can't get through our interference. Admiral Thompson walked the room, checking updates from military forces around the world. Every submarine crew remained at battle stations. Fighter pilots took turns in the air, maintaining constant coverage. Missile sites stayed locked on target. No one showed weakness. No one backed down. Message coming in, Miller announced. A big one. The main screen lit up with the Council voice. But this time it looked different. Its confident pose was gone. Its glowing eyes darted nervously. Humans, it began, you must understand your position is hopeless. We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Your primitive weapons cannot harm us. Your defiance is illogical. Wilson looked at Thompson, who nodded. They sent the same response they had been sending. No. Their shield just reset again, Miller reported. That's the 6th time since we started. Each time, we light them up with targeting systems. Each time, they flinch. Reports kept coming in from around the galaxy. 3 more worlds had joined Earth's defiance. Then 5 more. Species that had paid tribute for thousands of years were watching Earth and finding their courage. The Council tried a new approach. The voice appeared again, this time trying to sound friendly. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. We offer Earth special status. No tribute required, only a small recognition of Council authority. No. Hour after hour, the pattern continued. The Council would threaten. Earth would refuse. The Council would offer deals. Earth would refuse. The Council's ship would power up weapons. Earth's forces would target their weak points, and nothing would happen. In the streets below, people had lost their fear. New Yorkers set up chairs in Central Park, watching the standoff like it was entertainment. Street vendors sold "Just Say No" t-shirts. Someone projected Earth's response onto the side of the alien ship using a laser display. Message from the Russian submarine fleet, Thompson announced. They're picking up unusual readings from the Council ship. Miller rushed to analyze the data. They're venting plasma from their engines, like they're preparing for something big. His face went pale. They might be about to fire. Wilson stood straighter. Send the order. All forces ready. Around the world, submarine crews moved to battle stations. Fighter pilots charged weapons. Missile crews prepared to fire. But Miller held up his hand. Wait. These readings, they're not charging weapons. He laughed suddenly. They're running diagnostics on their engines. They're preparing to leave. The Council's final message came minutes later. The voice tried to sound dignified, but its words shook slightly. The Council has determined that Earth requires further observation before integration into galactic society. We will return when your species has matured. Wilson looked at Thompson. She nodded, smiling. Send our response one last time. Around the world, on every screen, in every language, Earth replied. No. The massive ship's engines glowed. Slowly, it began to rise. Higher and higher it went, until it was just a spot in the sky, and then nothing at all. In the command center, there was silence. Then someone started clapping. The clapping spread, turned to cheers, grew into celebration. Miller checked his instruments one final time. They're gone. Really gone. He looked up, tears in his eyes. And the messages from other worlds keep coming. More and more species saying no. The Council's empire is falling apart, system by system. Wilson looked out the window at the clear sky over New York. Sometimes, he said quietly, all it takes to change the galaxy is one word, spoken with courage. Thompson smiled. And really good poker face. 1 year had passed since the day Earth said no. Spring had returned to New York, and the shadow of the alien ship was just a memory. But the galaxy would never be the same. In the newly expanded United Nations building, General Secretary Wilson stood before representatives from not just Earth, but 12 other alien worlds. Each of these species had followed Earth's example, breaking free from the Council's control. Now they were building something new together. The latest reports are in, Dr. Miller announced to the gathered delegates. His team had spent the year studying the data they collected during the standoff. The Council's empire has lost 60% of its territory. Their reputation is shattered. Worlds that paid tribute for thousands of years are simply stopping. Admiral Thompson, now Earth's first galactic defense coordinator, pulled up a star map showing the changed galaxy. The Council still exists, she explained, but they've retreated to their core worlds. They don't demand tribute anymore. Instead, they're asking for trade agreements. She smiled, politely. Dr. Reed, who had been studying reports from across the galaxy, stepped forward. The most interesting change isn't political, it's cultural. Species that never dared to speak to each other are now sharing ideas, technology, art. The galaxy was frozen under the Council's control. Now it's alive again. A delegate from one of the free worlds stood up. They looked almost human, except for their silver skin and 4 arms. For 10,000 years, we believed we were alone, they said. We thought no one could stand against the Council. Then we saw Earth, a young world with simple technology. Stand up and say no. You showed us that courage matters more than power. Wilson nodded. And now we're building something better. Not an empire based on fear, but an alliance based on respect. Every world free to choose its own path. Every species helping each other grow. The changes weren't just happening in space. Earth itself had been transformed. The year of standing together against the Council had changed humanity. Old enemies had become friends. Ancient rivalries had faded. People had discovered that they could face any challenge if they stood united. In schools across Earth, children learned the history of those 7 days. They learned how humanity's greatest victory came not from superior weapons or advanced technology, but from courage, unity, and one simple word. Miller's team had made another interesting discovery. Hidden in the Council's transmissions was evidence that they had done this hundreds of times before, appearing over worlds, demanding tribute, showing their fake video of destruction. It had worked every time. Until Earth. Sometimes, Thompson told a class of students at the new Space Academy, the strongest weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes it's just being brave enough to stand up and say no to a bully. The alien ships that visited Earth now were different. Smaller, friendlier, coming to trade and learn rather than demand and threaten. Earth's technology was growing rapidly as they shared knowledge with their new allies. But they never forgot the lesson of the Council ship. In the UN building's main hall, they hung a simple plaque. On it was Earth's response to the Council, translated into every human language and those of their new alien friends. One word that had changed the galaxy. Wilson stood at his office window, looking at the busy streets below. Humans walked side by side with visitors from other worlds. Ships from distant stars moved peacefully through the sky, all because humanity had dared to say no. Dr. Reed joined him at the window. The Council made a mistake, she said. They thought they were gods coming to demand tribute from primitives. Instead, they were bullies who finally picked on someone who wasn't afraid. Wilson smiled. And now the galaxy is free. Not bad, Thompson said, joining them. For a species that only learned to make fire a few thousand years ago. Above them, the sky was clear and full of possibilities. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger galaxy, and they had done it not with violence or surrender, but with courage and unity. And one defiant word.